everybody.
There's some things we can thank you for, and then there's some things we can give you the salute for.
Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out to attend. And I knew that we would be a little bit slim on committee members just based on everyone's schedule. I've been in communication with most everyone. And so my plan today is to make sure that each committee member receives a copy of any handouts that you do provide us. So please don't feel like, even though there's just a few of us at the table, that it's not productive. Today is very, very important. And as you know, the purpose and the reason I have asked you all to come to speak to us today is for us to gather information. We want to know the status of the current status of infrastructure in Mississippi as a whole, particularly critical infrastructure, and the progress that we have made. And I'm going to say since about the 2008 timeframe, when we really started focusing in and putting money toward bridge repair and those projects that we deem critical. Again, I appreciate everybody taking time to be here and to prepare. I think I've spoken to each person on the agenda about today and about the reason for today. So I just appreciate all of you. So we're not going to, we're going to try to stay on track. So we'll start with Derek Surratt, the supervisors, and we're going to be informal. Look, I want everybody to ask questions. Members, I want you to jump in as you deem necessary and make sure we get the most out of today. Thank you, Derek.
Again, thank you, Chair, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. You need extra. All right. All right. I think everybody's got a handout. I've got a few extra ones. I'll try to leave them in the back on my way out. But what I've done here this afternoon, and I appreciate you calling me, Chair Lady, about the needs of counties and where we are, and kind of what we've done in the past and how we move forward. What I thought I would do today is pass out a survey that we did a few years ago. And it's not up to date. It's not done last year, but it's 2 or 3 years old. But I can guarantee you the situation has not gotten better. It's actually gotten worse in terms of county roads. Now, we've done a lot for bridges, and the emergency road and bridge relief program has been really good. Still got some work to do there. I know Harry Lee James after me will cover a lot of that. So I'm going to try not to be redundant and go over the same thing. But in terms of roads, just want to point out what I've handed out to you is just to remind and refresh everybody that county governments have roughly 52,000 road miles that they have to maintain and keep up. And we did a survey, I think this has been 3 or 4 years ago, that this survey was done. And this is what's in front of you, is that 76% of those road miles need some type of maintenance, meaning overlay, chip seal, some type of improvement. 46% of those roads need repair. And maintenance is one thing, repair is a different story. That means the road's in desperate need of, you got to get it back up to par. You can see from the bottom sheet here on the first handout is kind of an explanation of what happens if nothing's done. Basically what that chart is telling you, and I know it's small print and it's pretty hard to read, but on the right, it kind of goes, on the left, it kind of goes through it. But if you don't do anything, the road potentially drops down to a repair road instead of a maintenance road. So the next handout that I have on the next sheet here that talks about cost associated with the significantly increasing cost of county roads and infrastructure. And you will see on this sheet that of the 52,000 miles that counties maintain, it costs $100,000 per mile to overlay a road. That's just maintenance. So if you take the first bullet point there, and there's 76% of the road mileage in the state needs maintenance. So 76% of the 56,000, that would take $2.5 billion to bring that up. Now that's not obtainable. That's not achievable. Not with property tax, not with use tax, not with emergency road and bridge relief funds. What has simply happened is the cost to overlay, maintain a road has outpaced the property tax rates that we can charge and the assessed value of property in the state. So, question. So if you drop down to the second bullet point, 46%, just to put a number to the repair number, 46% of the roads are in repair and maintenance. And this would cost $250,000 per mile. And these are numbers from engineers. I got them from county engineers and checked with 2 or 3 about what it's actually costing today. So of the 46% of the 56,000 road miles that are in need of repair, you know, you multiply 250,000 per each of those miles, and you come to $5.9 billion to bring the ones that are in need of repair back to where they should be. So the total cost there that we're looking at is $8.5 billion. And so a number that even if we started today and we were given that type of money, we couldn't get all of that type of work done. But that's just the true picture. I think the best place to start is just to know what the whole picture is, what we're looking at. Now, the next part of the handout that I've got is an outline of the state that looks like this. And it shows by county, and this was done by the Stennis Institute when the Mississippi Economic Council put together the Blue Ribbon Transportation, Long-Term Transportation Commission. And that was a good commission we put together. We did a lot of studies and a lot of research. And I just pulled this back up because it's the best information that I know that's available to show you the amount of money that's currently going into the road and bridges per county out there today. And you can see from the first is the estimated revenue associated with county millage for road construction and maintenance. And it does say 2012, 2013, my how time gets away from us. It seems like yesterday we were on this commission, but I can assure you these numbers have not changed much because the assessed value growth in counties in Mississippi does not change much year over year. And we don't go out and raise property tax rates very often year over year. That's just something that we're all trying not to do for our landowners, homeowners alike. So if you look at this map, I think the ticket here is to understand that, you know, just to pick out a general size county of Grenada County, $1.6 million. That's the total amount of money that's generated off the millage in that county for a full year for the roads and bridges in that county. And if you recall what I just talked about, how it cost $100,000 per road mile just to do maintenance, or $250,000 per road mile to do repair, you can see that that millage rate and that amount of money doesn't go very far, doesn't get you very far. Even in a large county, such as even Rankin County, $11 million, that amount of money for county taxes is still a struggle to maintain roads at the cost that we're seeing today. But then you see some of your smaller counties are only $600,000-$700,000 a year just based on the assessed value in that county. Then the next page of this map breaks out the petroleum tax distribution to counties. And again, this was done in 2014, but here again, we've talked about in this very room how the petroleum tax has not been increasing. Actually, it's staying the same or going down. So you can assure you that these numbers are about the same. But you see the petroleum tax share, and this includes the municipal share, that number is not going to get it done either to cover the amount of costs that we have in the percentage going to counties. Most of those numbers are around 500,000 or less per county on average for the whole year for the petroleum tax. And then the third map, of course, shows the severance tax on gas, oil, and timber that counties receive. And you can see from this map that the numbers even get smaller. So, I mean, some counties, you go over, some counties receive $43 for the whole year in total gas, oil, and timber tax. Now, some counties is a little bit higher than that. It goes up to 200,000 or 300,000 in some counties, and some counties 2 million. So it just kind of gives you an understanding there. And then the last map is the timber severance tax, which the numbers there are broken out from the map before you. So, Madam Chair and members of the committee, I wanted to come in today and just talk about the need and the overall need. Oftentimes, I've tried to explain how much of a burden that we have for road maintenance and repair. And sometimes individuals will say, well, that's the county's responsibility. That's why you have property taxes and car tax. And yes, it is. But in today's world that we live in, with the increased cost of road construction, as these numbers show, clearly show, there is no possible way we could generate $8.5 billion in property taxes. If we did, we would property tax people way too high and run them out of the state. So I do appreciate you holding this committee hearing. And it just goes to show the underlying purpose of this and how important and how much the state legislators have done for us and the leadership of the state has done in terms of the use tax money. That has helped us greatly. I don't know what we have done, what we would have done without that. The emergency road and bridge relief, round 1 and round 2, significant support for us. But it's going to need to be continued. And this is not something that is going to be resolved overnight. It's not something that the state legislative body can resolve in one session. We're going to need a long-term plan moving forward to try to assist counties. And counties are going to have to do all they can to keep up with this rising cost. That concludes my remarks, and take any questions that you have.
I do have a question about the county share of the emergency road and bridge fund, the second round. Do you happen to know the breakdown between, I guess it would be among the counties, the cities, and the states, how that worked out?
On the second round of
On
the
the second
emergency road,
round.
I did see a list today that was supposed to be approved. I think Mississippi Department of Transportation may be up after me, and they approve all of those projects. I saw some of the money went to Mississippi Department of Transportation for their state roads, and some of the money went to counties. But I do not have a precise number
Okay,
available.
we can find out as the hearing goes on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions from any other members? Questions? We may have questions as we hear from other speakers, maybe at the end, but we thank you for your time for
Yeah,
coming.
thank you. I appreciate
Thank
y'all's
you.
work on this and support. Thank you.
We've got Mr. Forrester now coming up to talk to us from the engineers.
Good afternoon, Chairman Branning, and members of the committee. First off and foremost, thank you for inviting us here to speak about critical infrastructure issues. As you indicated, my name is Jacob Forrester, and I'm a past president of the Mississippi section of American Society of Civil Engineers and the assistant general manager currently at Starkville Utilities in Starkville, Mississippi. We provide electric and water services for more than 14,000 homes and businesses in Starkville, as well as for Mississippi State University. Today, I'm appearing before you on behalf of Mississippi section of ASCE, which is the oldest and largest engineering society in the nation. Our section was founded in 1969 and has nearly 1,000 members from all disciplines and sectors of civil engineering. As stewards of our infrastructure, civil engineers are responsible for the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of our vital public works. With that responsibility comes the obligation to periodically assess the state of our infrastructure report on its conditions and performance, and advise on the next steps necessary to improve it. So on behalf of ASCE, I'm kind of giving a general overview of infrastructure and an easily consumable product, state like report card grades, so to speak, A through F. I've joined you today to discuss the ASCE report card for Mississippi's infrastructure, which is a snapshot for residents and businesses and policymakers alike to engage in conversation about where we are and where we want to be. The report card was developed by a team of engineers in the state who all volunteered their time. And as I mentioned a moment ago, it uses a simple A to F formula. The cumulative report card grade for the 2020 report card that was released by ASCE is a D+. Unfortunately, as a state that prides itself for hospitality, we show D+ is not very welcoming. You know, Mississippi's infrastructure is aging and beyond its useful life, which impacts the quality of life for our residents and suppresses economic growth. If we want to continue our long-standing tradition as a hospitality state and ensure that good-paying jobs in the years ahead are in place, we've got to focus on modernizing our roads, bridges, drinking water systems, airports, and more. In 2020, the report card for Mississippi's infrastructure covers 12 categories, and I believe that you guys have that handout. I've got the entire report card. That's just a pamphlet that provides a quick and easily consumable component. But if you want to see the whole 84-page report card, please let me know and I'll be happy to email that to you. This afternoon, I'd like to highlight some of the report card's top findings and recommendations. First and foremost, the report card clearly demonstrates that when there is investment in Mississippi's infrastructure, there are more jobs created, which of course means more economic growth. Mississippi's ports, for instance, are critical to the state's economic well-being, and our DOT has noted that Mississippi's ports support 125,000 jobs and nearly $5.4 billion in income. They generate nearly $17 billion in economic stimulus annually. As an additional example, our airports, which received a C, employ over 20,000 people with a total payroll of $721 million and an economic output of $2.5 billion. Secondly, much of Mississippi's infrastructure is aging and beyond its useful life, which impacts the quality of life and decreases economic efficiency in Mississippi's residents. For example, more than 300 bridges in Mississippi have been closed by the Federal Highway, and that's been determined based on the fact that the structures were insufficient when they were inspected and they posed risk to the traveling public. You may recall that some of those bridges brought about news reports of, emergency vehicles being affected, school buses being affected, and even up into the extent of private residents having to go through fields to get around some of these bridges that were closed. A total of 1,918 of Mississippi's bridges are currently weight restricted. Some are posted for a 4-ton load, which is approximately the weight of a pickup truck. Spurred by bridge closures and to address safety concerns, the Mississippi legislature did approve approximately $100 million annually for bridge maintenance and rehabilitation, as well as an additional $250 million in bonds in 2018, and ASCE absolutely applauds this measure. While this additional funding is helpful, it does not come close to covering the gap of $1.6 billion are reversing the years of underinvestment that the state's highways have endured and bridges have endured. Additionally, it's without a doubt that our roads need help. Roadway projects are still largely paid for with an 18.4 cents per gallon federal tax on gasoline, which hasn't been raised for over 30 years. So inflation and other factors have decreased the spending power of the state's gas tax, which has hurt. This has resulted in nearly 40% of major urban road miles in the state being assessed in poor condition. And that was done in 2018, which is double the national average. To put this in a little bit more tangible terms, the average motorist, we estimate, spends an additional $820 in repairs on their vehicles annually due to the roadway conditions. Also due partially to the roadway conditions, we believe that the state's fatality rate in 2018 was one of the highest in the nation and 40% greater than the national average. Finally, our last key findings is that where the private sector has made investments, for example, in the energy grid and parts of the freight system like ports and rails, results can be seen. Ports and rails are pulling their weight as evidenced by the grades, which were two of the highest in the report. The three largest Mississippi ports are investing in infrastructure, although none are capable of receiving large post-Panamic ships. Those ships are becoming increasingly common, and if Mississippi wants to capture that component of the market, it's important that we have a serious discussion. Due to rebuilding efforts and new investments following the unfortunate event of Hurricane Katrina, all three ports are in good condition and have enough capacity to meet the current needs. Meanwhile, the railway system provides over a quarter of freight services in Mississippi. Rail lines are typically in decent condition. They also have sufficient capacity to support a higher level of train operations. The limited number of grade crossings, however, is something that we should possibly focus on for railway crossings, as that is contributing to avoidable accidents. As has been demonstrated this afternoon, most of Mississippi's infrastructure grades are not good, but we face a unique opportunity with the recent passage of Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act by Congress. Over the last 15 years, our infrastructure systems have faced numerous unprecedented challenges in the forms of tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts, and floods. But every time Mississippians have been faced with a challenge, we've pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps and gotten to work. And we think it and we grow it, and it's time that we invest in it. If we're ready to improve our infrastructure grades, ASC has some suggestions to start improving those grades. First, ensure that infrastructure investment is strategically focused on efforts that maximize good paying jobs, promote the state's economic competitiveness, and enhances the usability so that all Mississippians continue to be proud to call our state home. Second, design, operate, maintain, and expand infrastructure in accordance with the federal leadership by using consensus-based codes, specifications, and standards that reduce the potential loss of jobs, economic opportunity, and critical natural resources. As an example, FEMA and other federal agencies have begun to pivot toward mitigation measures to ensure better use of taxpayer dollars, which is a strategy that Mississippi should also employ. Third, develop and disseminate a comprehensive education campaign on the true cost and savings associated with investment in critical infrastructure around the state through publicly accessible channels and platforms such as Mississippi Public Broadcasting and social media platforms. And finally, Mississippi's highways and scenic back roads are the state's critical arteries to our homes, businesses, and outdoor recreation. So roadway users must contribute a fair share to aid in maintenance and fill the gap that isn't covered by current state spending. In conclusion, underinvestment in our infrastructure risks our economic future and the quality of lives for Mississippians. And it's the goal of everybody in this room to make sure that Mississippi remains competitive in a growing global economy. And if we can commit to funding additional infrastructure, I believe that we can maintain that. I would like to once again thank the committee for inviting me to participate in today's hearings, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Questions by any members? And if you have not looked at the full report, on this pamphlet on the first sheet, it gives you the website, a lot of good information in that report. So I appreciate you coming today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. James, you are up, sir. The State Aid Road.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. Good to be here. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you about something that has gotten near and dear to my heart over the past few years. I provided a packet of information to, I think, most of you, and I've got some copies in the back as well with some specific information. Information in the packets is geared toward the counties that you represent, not necessarily specifically your district, but the entire county, to kind of show you what's going on in your county with state aid roads, closed and posted bridges, both on the local and the state aid system and everything. And then there's a summary of county bridge information as well. Copy of the Mississippi Code, which kind of defines what state aid is. And I'm primarily going to focus on, state aid roads and the state aid system, because that's kind of the key to what we're, I think, trying to do. Just to kind of let you know, from February of 19, when there were 532 bridges that were closed on the local system, we are now, as of Monday, 266 closed bridges statewide. That's due to a number of factors, primarily due to money as much as anything. We all know that money works. Money solves a lot of problems. I mean, look what happened after Katrina, and $1 billion was thrown at the coast, replaced those two huge bridges down there, rebuilt all of Highway 90. There's still needs down there, but again, money speaks. With all of the funding sources that are being spent now at the county level for roads and bridges, and I'll defer to Derek's numbers with the road situation and everything. I will be looking at bridges more than anything. The local system bridge program now funded by use tax. You get state aid revenue that comes in, which is based on a minimum amount of petroleum revenue plus some sales tax that goes to it as well. There's a good thing there. The thing that I found out of the past few months, or actually this past year, state aid revenue, when it gets down to close to the middle of the board term, those supervisors are kind of feisty about not wanting to fix a bridge. They'd rather spend it on the road. So I'm looking at competing projects within the state aid system for them, where I'm trying to get them to spend a little bit of their state aid money on a bridge, and they're more interested in in paving the road toward the end of the board term and everything, which that's there. And again, it goes back to just throw more money at state aid, and we can all get what we want to out of it. The counties do a lot of work with their own funds. Now, when I say their own funds, now the use tax that Derek was talking about has contributed greatly toward things they're able to do. They get out and do some maintenance. They throw that money in their road and bridge fund, and they've got to spend that money in a certain amount of time, as opposed to their state aid money and their LSBP money. We try to get them to spend that within a board term, but those county funds that come in through the use tax, I mean, we have seen, if you don't use it, you ain't gonna get it the next year, or at least not all of it. So they need to go ahead and realize they've got to spend that money and spend it wisely. And that doesn't necessarily mean divide it by 5 either. Everybody's got to kind of pull on the same end of the rope for that to happen. And then probably the game changer in all of this was the ERBR program that was created back in 2018 and then launched in 19 and has moved forward. That has done so much good for the county bridge infrastructure. And I'm looking forward to, the projects that were announced today, and then hopefully another influx of funds into it in the future, maybe leading up to something like almost an infrastructure bank or something that could be, used moving forward. We have, or through my district engineers, we've made it a targeted area this time during this 4-year board term. We told them on the front end 2 years ago that we wanted the counties to focus on their bridge infrastructure. We kind of shuffled the deck a little bit. It was like number 2 in the past. It's number 1 this time. And that's why we've kind of got this competing, project situation with them. So we're give a little bit, take a little bit, realizing they are getting a lot more funding now from the use tax than they, have ever seen before as well. So in fact, the use tax, when it's all said and done, probably will generate as much money for them over a 4-year period as what they see in their state aid revenue. So it's significant. To address all the bridge needs statewide at the local level, and this is LSVP and the state aid bridges. I don't know where Jacob got his numbers, but he was right on, because I came up with the same $1.6 billion just to address the state aid needs, state aid bridges, closed and posted bridges. We're looking somewhere around $800 million. And at the beginning of the board term, I had tried to look at possibly on the closed bridges, closed state aid bridges, trying to reduce the number of those by half over the board term. We are well on our way to doing that, but it's going to take a significant amount of money, and another $350 million, added to the pot to, heard that along the way would really be helpful. Currently, I've got 155 local system bridge projects under development. I've got 80 state aid bridge projects under development. And something, those of you that have a municipality in your county, there are 1,084 bridges in municipalities statewide. Now, the counties, through their county engineers, inspect all the bridges, regardless of whether they're in the county or the city. They have to agree amongst themselves how the funding goes, is split up if there's any money spent in the at the county level or whatever, but there are provisions, I think, in statute for that to occur. So, and of those 1,084 bridges, I think there's 147 are posted, to some degree. I provided that information to Sherry Veazey last week. Just in general, if you look at the total number of bridges statewide, there's 10,573. And here's a little bit of trivia for you. Who's got the oldest bridge in the state on the local level? And he walked in late today. Mr. Chairman, 1900 in Vicksburg. That's the old railroad bridge. It's the oldest bridge in the state. And there's several more that are in the early 1900s. So you think about it. I'll be 68 years old in January. And I did a search, and there are 36 bridges left on the system that were created or went online the year I was born. So if you think about, I live in the small town or outside of Canton, which is about 10,000, 12,000 people. If I look around and think, there's only 36 more people living in this town that are my age, that's scary. I think I got a lot of life left in me, and I hope a lot of these older bridges have the same thing. But they're not getting any younger. They age, and it's just like we do. Is something goes wrong, that deterioration accelerates. It doesn't get any better. We made a tremendous investment in the inspection of bridges for safety-wise, to make sure that the traveling public, when they hit a bridge, when they go across the bridge, I didn't mean to say hit one. When they go across one, an open bridge is safe, a closed bridge is not. So if you come across one that is closed, you better not go across it. The number of posted bridges statewide is 1,852. That's 17.5%. The number of closed bridges statewide, as I said, is 266, which is 2.5%. And magically, if you add those together, that's 20% of the entire local bridge inventory. The total number of state aid bridges is 5,277, which is right at half of the bridges statewide. The number of posted state aid bridges is 955, which is a little over 18%. The number of closed state aid bridges is 83, which is 1.6%. And the number of bridges under construction. Now, this is you're going to think this is maybe a bogus number, but we report it as 83. But we don't know what the counties are out there doing on their own. There are a lot of situations out there that bridges have not been documented that they are under construction. So until we've got a picture of it and we know that it's out of service and it's got a new one coming in its place, we don't count it as being under construction. And then I've got in some of this information I've given you, I've got some more information on the state aid road mileage overall and everything. And you can find the, the per county or by county level of road miles in statute or on our website. We go into detail with things like that as well. One thing and we're looking at is trying to improve the bridges and everything, the road infrastructure. I mean, it is what it is. I was kidding Derek earlier. I said that $1 billion figure you came up with, you might as well put a T in front of it for it ever to resolve itself. I mean, everybody likes to think of $1 trillion now, but $1 billion will help, but it's going to take a lot of billions of dollars over time to do it. And that's the thing is things age. It's a recurring problem. I mean, it's never going away, just like bridge inspection. I mean, we're going to be spending hopefully not $30 million a year on bridge inspection from now to eternity. Hopefully those costs will come down as the age of the local infrastructure gets smaller, reduces, but that'll, that it's just going to take a while to do that. So
Mr. James, let me jump in just a moment, if you will. I think Chairman Hodgson has a question while it's fresh on his mind, if you'd like to. We are, I think we have a couple of folks on the Zoom call. So if you would.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Harry Lee. I want to go back to something you said at the beginning about the decisions that are made by the supervisors as it relates to repairing the bridges. I'm looking at this map of the state and I realize that it appears just at a glance, there are a lot of bridges on my side of the state, on the west side of the state, that are in need, that are closed and need to be repaired, more so than the east side of the state. This
Right.
map is, would that my assumption or my view of this be correct?
You are, and part of that is, I guess, as anything is like genetics. I mean, the types of streams that are crossed, the bridges that go in there, the replacement of them and everything is not just that they're taking less care of what they've got. I think it's just a combination of a lot of factors come into play. And it's a lot of information to comprehend.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna say this to defend the counties in one sense, and that is, I think about Issaquah County. I'll pick on them because it's a county that I represent. One bridge repair would cost roughly over Steel Bayou. What would a bridge cost to repair there, do you think? How many millions?
It's probably $2 million, something
Okay.
like that, because we were looking at the Sumner Bridge on Lake George up in Yazoo County, and it's
Okay.
It's about a $4 million bridge, and it's about half as long, I believe.
And I look at the revenues that they're generating from the property taxes and they're probably not getting a lot of use tax money in some of those counties, and then the other taxes that would go to this. So I recognize the difficulty of the problem when you don't have a lot of income, a lot of revenue. I know Issaquah County for a fact does not have a lot of money coming in. There's not a lot of revenue. Their primary sources of revenue are going to be, farmland and hunting land leases and the property tax they get. What do we do? What do we say? And I guess I could ask this question to Derek too, but what do we say for, some counties? I know we need to see some of these bridges get repaired, but there are other counties that would say, well, look, we're not going to get anything out of this pot because we've been taking care of our bridges all along. How do we reconcile as legislators? How do we reconcile the concern that some counties, I look at Washington County, it looks like they've got, 15 bridges or so at least that are out. What about a county like Neshoba, Madam Chair. They've got none out. How is she going to feel about sending a lot of money to Washington County and Neshoba getting none for bridge repair? And I'm not trying to put you on, I know it's a difficult question, but it's hard for us to reconcile too. Has there been any discussion about that with the counties or others as to how we reconcile that problem?
Obviously, in the past, you put the money where the problem is, but in some cases, those problems are overwhelming. Washington County is one. You get up in Bolivar County, they've got a bunch of timber bridges up there. Lincoln County, I mean, who would have thought down there? They've got issues down there. Lauderdale County is another one as well. But there's just not enough money to go around. So I think the approach that was taken when the ERBR program was developed, look at the projects that are submitted by the counties, let them determine what their needs are, where they are, and then let them submit projects for consideration, and then let a scoring system, which has been used in the past, come into play and assist in selecting those projects for that limited pot of money out there. The problem being not the ones that are selected. The problem is the pot's not big enough to fund what the needs are. There are huge bridges out there that will never receive enough money, either from the ad valorem taxes or from their state aid revenue or whatever, to make some of these investments that are needed for, a capital project like that. Esquina County, it's got 11 bridges state, county-wide, and they don't have a gas station. So I don't know, they're even selling lottery tickets everywhere. So they're getting any revenue from that.
Well, they'll get part of the 80 million, I suppose, but
yeah, so they're hopefully they're getting some, some share out of, things like that. But is there ever a perfect system? No, we just have to do the best we can and work with the counties and try to make sure that they are addressing the needs. And I've worked with pretty much every county that's made a submittal so far to look at their bridge infrastructure and try to help them gauge and determine where their needs are, because in the past it looks like they didn't really pay any attention to what it was. And part of it is the level of inspection that is coming about now. We've gotten a lot more proactive than reactive than we have in the past with funding, to try to assist them in making educated decisions with their funding, with the limited funding that they may have. Look at these highly detailed bridge inspection reports that have either urgent maintenance needs or routine maintenance needs. Take those into account. Use some of that use tax money to address some of those routine maintenance needs that could, add another 5 years to the life of that bridge out there.
well, I agree. I mean, that's not a decision we can make in the legislature as far as that kind of routine maintenance, because that's something the county is going to deal with. And I think that's part of the messaging. And I'm looking at Derek now too. I think that's part of the messaging that's got to be in this equation, is that, look, sometimes it may be because you need the money that's coming through the infrastructure program at the federal government or something through the state government. But sometimes it's because it's prioritizing the things at the county level. I mean, you can probably look at the map and tell maybe there's some places that are prioritizing a little bit better than others. And that's where we, when people in our district see a bridge out, they automatically think that it's a state or a federal problem. And sometimes it's at the local level. I'm not meaning to point the fingers. I mean, sometimes it is because it's just an overall lack of funding, but sometimes it's because those decisions are not being made on what are the priorities for the citizens in that area. And you said it yourself, I think, early on. And I think sometimes they prioritize things differently than what you might prioritize, but they're elected to make that decision.
Right. And we respect that and work to improve that. And if that's ultimately the decision they make to do things like that, that's their decision, because they are the owners of that infrastructure and everything. But we want to make sure that they are aware of what the needs are of something that maybe in the past was not conveyed to them, to make sure that they can, serve everybody. I mean, you got too many places out in the Delta and up and down that the west side of the state where emergency vehicles just can't go. I mean, we were always heard, well, emergency vehicles are exempt. Well, they are from certain things, but they can't cross a closed bridge or a posted bridge, at least not legally. So,
Well, I know we got other people to talk, Madam Chair, but thank you, Harry Lee. I just wanted to kind of touch on that for a few minutes, and I know there'll be some other questions later on.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, something that I had wanted to ask anyway, so we'll go ahead and plug it in here. Due to the number of bridges that we see that are still closed and in need of repair, can you speak to how many applications, just roughly, were received for the ERBRF round 2? I mean, I know Derek does a great job of keeping his counties informed of what's happening, but I just wonder, are they applying for the ERBRF funds for the bridges specifically?
All I can say to that is yes, and I think I'll defer to Brad and the MDOT for the exact numbers. They're the ones that, that run and keep up with that program, so I don't want to speak, for them.
Okay, I can hold that question until they
Yeah.
speak. And
So-
I believe Senator McClendon had a question.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lee. And Senator Hobson really touched on my question. What I was going to ask was how much of the blame should be, not blame, but responsibility should go back on the local government of how they've been maintained or how, through the years. We as legislatures get hit the 2 years that I've been here about changing the scope of practice, whether it be physicians, nurses, optometrists, ophthalmologists. How do we streamline the engineering process? Because that is a huge cost in these bridges. Is there a way that maybe the high traffic bridges don't have to go through the same strenuous that, say, a Goodman Road up in DeSoto County would? It's just a question. Or do we always have to go through the same engineering process for a bridge?
As far as bridge inspection, and I'm assuming you're talking about the $30 million we're spending on that.
I'm talking about all these red dots on this, right here on this map.
Every one of those is a bridge that requires an inspection, either on a 12-month or 24-month cycle. Everybody likes to refer to the, federal bridge inspectors coming in. The county engineers are performing the majority of these bridge inspections right now. And that's where they need to be done at the local level. So they can report back to the boards of supervisors and advise them just as, a physician or an attorney would to the board as well as to what their recommendation is as to how to move forward to make improvements and everything.
So to get these back up and running, these bridges that are closed, is there any way to streamline the engineering process? Or is it the engineering process has to be done on every single bridge, whether it be a high occupancy bridge or, 10 cars a day?
That is being done now, but it really boils down to the source of funding. If the county gets out there and uses their own money, they've got one criteria that they may have adopted to use. If they come through state aid, we have our own criteria that we have to have, which is set out in statute. If there's federal money involved in it, have to do certain things. Thing is, a bridge is like an elevator. If only one person rides it a day or a year, it still has to have the same level of scrutiny on it that it does if it has 100,000 people. So
Thank you, sir.
that has to be taken into, you really can't take that out of the equation. Now that's where the counties can come in and determine with level of importance of which ones they want to replace and repair, sooner than later. And it's up to them to make that determination, and all have done a good job. But I mean, we've got limited resources. The entire state has always had more needs than they've had resources, either, from the top all the way to the bottom. So it's just hard to, criticize anybody for not doing what they can. They do the best they can with what they have. It's like everybody in the state does.
I just look at like our map, we have 4 yellow circles. But yet you go to some counties, there may be 25 on here. There's so many that are overlapping, you can't count them. Is that a local level problem or is that a legislative problem?
As I said, a lot of it is genetics. The locals have come in on their own in many cases, have sold bonds and determined to, to make some improvements and everything where they have the means to do that. But you get somewhere up in either Grenada or Yalobusha County or Calhoun County, they don't have the means to do the things that DeSoto or Lamar or Harrison County might have. So Is it a local problem? Yes. Is it something that's solvable? Yes, I think it's something at some point the legislature could address. I don't have the answer though.
So if a bridge has got to where it's almost uncrossable, do we treat, and we have federal highways that are almost unusable because there's so much traffic on them. That's our problem up in DeSoto, where we've got 2-lane I-55 trying to get people to and from work that should have been 5-lane on each side, 10-lane or 8-lane years and years ago. The Hernando exit is still sitting there with the 1966 bridge.
I know a county that take those 1966 bridges, if they could yank them out and pull them out in the county in a heartbeat. So, but I agree with you. Yeah. And again, it goes back to resources, being able to do the things and not to disown the federal aid money that's coming down and everything. Federal aid is like a piece of gum that you step on. You can hardly ever get rid of. So the best money that can be spent at the county level is pure state dollars. They have the most flexibility of being able to do that. And that's where the ERVR program comes in. It's a fair process. Everybody's on equal footing when they submit their projects and everything. Again, it's just not enough money to go around to satisfy the needs statewide.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for the information. And let me ask, I know I jumped in to interrupt. Did you have other information you wanted to share with us, or did?
I could sit up here and talk for another hour, but I'm not. I
Okay.
know we've got other speakers that have come out here, but I do have, they put some copies of the handouts in the back, not the ones that are county specific for y'all, but overall and everything. So please take them. I don't want to take them back if I don't
Thank
have
you.
to.
We may circle back toward the end with some follow-up questions. We appreciate
Sure.
you coming. Thank you so
Anytime.
much.
Thank you.
All right, we've got Mr. White next with MDOT.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I've had the opportunity to work with all of you in the past and look forward to working with you in this new capacity. I've been at MDOT now for about 4 months, and the commission and the staff have been very supportive and kind and patient with me as we take on the challenge of providing a transportation system for our state. I can pretty concisely state what the challenges we face at the Department of Transportation before you. They fall in 2 categories. One is obviously an echo of what previous speakers have talked about, and that's determining how we're going to fund an adequate transportation system. And then number 2 is the challenge of personnel that we're having. MDOT's budget has been pretty flat for the last several years. It's about $1.2 billion. A little better than half of that has come from federal government in way of reimbursements back down to the state. I think it's important to point out that of the 1.2 billion, nearly $1 billion of that is connected back to highway and bridge maintenance or construction in some way. So the department devotes a lot of its time and resources in trying to maintain a good system for the taxpayers of the state. But about 10 years ago, due to the funding issues that the agency was having, the commission, which incidentally, I think Commissioner John Caldwell is here. I want to recognize him in the audience. The commission made the decision that by and large, they needed to abandon capacity projects. There's a couple of exceptions of that in order to redirect funds and resources to the rehabilitation of our existing system, to try to protect the investment that the taxpayers had already made around the state. But even with that investment, we're running at about a $400 million a year gap in what would be needed based on the universal formulas that DOTs use to grade when you would want to start that rehabilitation process of your pavement. About a $400 million annual gap in the funding necessary in order to keep our infrastructure in a good foundational level. If you look at the bridges across the state that are on the state system, not to be confused with state aid. Only 2% of the bridges on the state system are considered to be in poor condition. Yet the funds necessary for us to maintain or replace all those that are in fair condition or to keep good bridges around the state would require another $50 million a year annually that we don't have in order to do that. I know, and we'll touch on this in a minute with the federal package that was just passed, we'll have an opportunity to address both of those areas. But I'd like to devote some time to what I see, if you were to ask me, what our number one challenge is as the state's Department of Transportation, and it's in the way of personnel. As most of you know, I worked there when Dick Hall was appointed a transportation commissioner back when God was a boy, a long time ago. And at that time, if you went around the 10th floor of the department, and this could be said for the district engineers, each of the division heads around the agency, probably the average tenure of the individuals that held those positions were around between 30 and 35 years of service with the department. These were folks that had great institutional knowledge, that had written many of the manuals by which we have to go by, that understood the system, that knew where all the bodies were buried, and that could help us run an efficient agency. We also had more personnel. Our divisions like roadway design, construction, were bigger divisions where we were able to recruit, maintain professionals that could come in and do a lot of work in-house. A lot of the work from the 87 highway program was done in-house in the way of design and other phases like that. Today, if you were to poll that, I think our average tenure is somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 to 20 years in those same positions. And we're finding ourselves in a position to where it's very difficult to recruit and maintain engineers over the long haul. But we're also facing that on the other end of the spectrum, all of our, what I would call our frontline workers. When a hurricane comes through, before all your law enforcement and your other first responders can get through to the houses and the people that need their help, it's MDOT crews that are out there opening up the roads, working with the counties and local government to open up the roadways to allow for the emergency vehicles to get through. We have countless vacancies in those positions around the state that hinder our ability to carry out our mission. And a lot of that is because we hire them at a starting pay of around 18 or 19,000 a year. They come on board with us, they learn a skill, and then you take a place like where I'm from, Simpson County, that can step out and the Board of Supervisors can say, well, we're going to pay you the equivalent of $1 more an hour, and we're losing our employees to local governments. So that's a situation that we're dealing with there as well. But how does that hurt us in the long run? You know, it's a popular thing to talk about trying to outsource or privatize things. And in many instances, I'm in favor of doing that. And there are areas where it makes sense for MDOT to do that. But if you look at what we're having to pay now to pay consultants for work, the fees are completely out of line. Staff reviewed one project and it was a 3-to-1 ratio by what we were paying consultants as opposed to what it could have cost had we had the capability of doing some of that work in-house. So I'm hopeful that the SEC squared that's coming out will give us some of its promised flexibility to move people around within the system, to give our employees more competitive wages, to allow us to compete for staff, for engineers, for frontline workers. But also it's going to take a commitment of revenue and the authority to pay them in order to keep them there. But I think regardless of what we have in the way of funds for projects, if we don't have a team in order to implement it, then I think we're going to find ourselves in a lot of problems. In 1987, like I mentioned, back in those days, the department was geared up in order to be able to do a lot of the preliminary pre-construction work on some of the capacity projects that the legislature mandated to be done. Now we have the federal package that Congress has passed. And I have to tell you in all honesty, that a lot of work, depending on how it's spent, if there's an emphasis for capacity projects, there's going to be a need for consultants and a lot of work that's going to drive up the cost of a lot of those projects. But that to me is one of the biggest challenge that we're facing, and something that I look forward to working with the leadership of the legislature to try to address. I know that there's been talk in the past, we're primarily funded through fuel tax. I feel like transportation is a core function of government, but not all of what the fuel tax that's collected is going to what I would call real transportation, even within our own bill. And these are minor carve outs, but they give you examples of where through the years, our appropriation bill has been amended to where $800,000 a year goes to MDA to pay for their employees at the welcome centers around the state. $650,000 years go to Mississippi State or Department of Ag to pay for beaver control. And there's other examples like that that individually are not consequential numbers. And I'm certainly not questioning the need for the service that they're paying for. But those are all dollars that, if left to us, could be diverted back into the pot of money that was going directly to the infrastructure that I think the taxes were collected and meant for to begin with. When you look at the growth of electric vehicles and the federal government gearing up to push more of the federal fleet to electric vehicles, automobile companies looking at trying to focus on a lot of their building of new vehicles, focusing in on that area. The fuel tax, I question its sustainability even, as less people will be paying for fuel tax. And so we're going to be left with this investment around the state of a transportation system with the need to protect it and to maintain it. So I guess I'm bringing you a problem that I don't have a solution to, but I look forward to working with you to try to have a meaningful conversation about how do we focus revenues in a committed, reliable way and get them, pardon the pun, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, where it can be put to good use. But those are the things that I would bring up to you that we're in desperate need of. In talking of the federal bill that was passed, we're still reviewing that bill. Here, what I would tell you are the most important things for you as a legislature to take back, and it's similar to what we told the commission this morning. That bill is full of rules and regulations that are tied to all of the money. Our staff have had conversations with Federal Highway Administration yesterday, and they are in the process of having meetings back with the federal DOT, where I anticipate more rules and regulations will be promulgated. All of this money will go through our normal formula process and will ultimately end up in some of these different categories to be spent with. So I don't want anybody to have the false notion that we're going to be sitting here and Santa Claus is going to drop this big pot of money in our lap that we can spend on anything that we want to spend it on. It's coming with a lot of strings attached that Harry Lee kind of touched on when you're dealing with federal money. So I think it's going to be very important for us to continue working hand in glove together to be sure that when the money is appropriated, that it's appropriated in a way that we can make sure the taxpayers get the best use out of it, because the last thing we want is to try to spend money in a way that results in some federal clawback or a pot of money that we're unable to use. But ultimately, that's what I would have, Madam Chairman, to offer for your thoughts. I'm happy to answer any questions you asked a while ago, and I'm not going to steal Mr. McCormick's thunder. I know he's going to talk about the ERBR program, but I think about 31% of what was awarded today went to MDOT, with the rest going to local communities.
Thank you for that. Any questions from any members? Yes, sir. I thought you might have a couple.
Oh, Madam Chair, thank you very much. And thank you, Brad, since you happened to bring it up about the fuel tax and the electronic vehicles. And I think you're spot on. Eventually, fuel tax is going to be, maybe well after our lifetimes, it's going to be a non-starter for any transportation project. There's just not going to be enough money in it. We hear that and read about it a lot. If memory serves me correct, in the 2018 bill that we passed to use the revenue bonds and the lottery proceeds, we actually put those funds all put together would have equated to probably a 5 cent or better increase to taxes, but they were utilizing lottery and revenue funds. Is that about right, about your
It
understanding?
very well may be. I think we've got about 80 million a year that comes from the lottery.
Yeah.
And I meant to touch on that. I mean, that's been a tremendous help. The commission decided to vote that revenue stream to 2-lane state highways that had poor pavement rehabilitation needs greatly there. So it's being put to really good use.
Yeah, and I'm saying this more for edification. Really, it's not about, I mean, I hear this a lot, but I know, and that stream is set for years. I think it was 10 years total. And then of course we can look at it, but that stream of revenue is set for 10 years. And it really probably put more in than what a 4 or 5 cent sale increase in gas taxes would have put into the pot for all of our transportation needs. Not, and you can argue, everybody can sit there and argue whether we should have had more money. I think probably the biggest issue that I've heard that I would agree with is the cost of doing business. The cost of building a road and fixing a bridge is probably a lot more now than it was years ago. And that may be the biggest driver, if you want to call it that, for a problem in keeping up with the road needs in Mississippi. Is that fairly accurate
It's
statement?
certainly a contributor. I don't know that I would limit it to that. I mean, but yeah, I mean, even over just through COVID, the cost of materials and things like that have gone up considerably. So the cost of doing business certainly is there. The competitiveness of trying to find a workforce. I had one contractor that told me in the last calendar year, he's given 3 raises to his employees just to keep them from quitting and going elsewhere or things like that. And those are all things that, it's popular to say government should be run like a business, but government's not a business. We operate under totally different rules and we have totally different restraints that are placed on us. We can't give those raises out that the private sector is given to try to keep employees. That's getting a little off topic of what you're saying.
No, it's not off topic.
But
I
to
think
answer
that's
your question,
pertinent.
I think that's exactly what I was trying to say, is that I don't know what the answer will be, but I think that it's time that we do sit down and have a meaningful conversation about how do we commit a dedicated revenue stream to try to address the needs that we're having here, recognizing that for most of those needs is having a workforce at the Department of Transportation capable of doing the work that helps cut the cost to make sure that as much of the money that's dedicated for transportation gets truly to the actual end product that we're trying to deliver to the consumer.
Well, that's what I look forward to, the discussion I look forward to having with you. I mean, you're new on the job, but certainly through the chair and myself, we want to work with you to make sure that the dollars are going to where they need to go so that we can see improved roads and bridges and other things too, as you mentioned. I mean, especially with the federal funds, there's, some of those funds that are coming out for infrastructure, everybody ought to be aware, if they're not, that it's going to other things, which are good calls: ports, airports, broadband, water, sewer,
Electric vehicle charging stations.
Lots of different things. So, but anyway, I look forward to working with you on that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I believe Senator Blunt has some questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. White. I've enjoyed your presentation. I think we all knew sort of the state that we've got a lot of challenges out with our roads and bridges, but I had not thought as deeply as I should have about your personnel challenges. And I appreciate you raising those here today. I guess what I heard you say is you can't always run government like a business. We need to pay our state employees more money, and privatization is often more expensive and less efficient than letting y'all do it. And a number of us have been making those points for a long time, and I'm glad to hear you make those same points. And then I hear you saying that with this new money coming down, it's really the time to fix it now, because I understand the federal infrastructure plan is 5 years of funding, and we need to get this straight now so we can minimize those costs, consulting costs, outside engineering costs, and try to do those in-house as we get this $3.5 billion from the federal government. Is that fair to say?
Just to give you something to compare that to, it's about 3.3 billion over 5 years that will be devoted to highways and bridges.
Right.
That includes now what we normally get, the 530 million a year that we would anticipate every year. So this is all part of that Transportation Authorization Act where they've added to. So we're getting additional monies
Right.
to the result of 3.3 billion over 5 years.
Right.
Now, to give you a comparison of that, 20 years ago, the legislature created the fourth phase of the 87 highway program, Vision 21. And in it, y'all put criteria through which a project had to go in order to be placed on the capacity list. And that was designed to get the politics out of picking the highways like we had in the 87 4-lane program. So now you have a list that's been submitted to the legislature, but I can get copies for anybody that needs it, that are projects that meet that criteria of average daily traffic count that's gotten more than what the road can handle, or among other things, economic development, safety. We've got a list of those projects that combined come to a minimum of $4.5 billion. That's only capacity. That's before you get into the rehabilitation needs around the state.
Those are new projects?
They're not new. They're projects that have been on the books for some time that have met the criteria that say there is a need, an immediate or a mid-range or long-term need for this capacity improvement project, but there's been no money to build them.
Right.
So you've got a minimum of $4.5 billion sitting there. But I would caution you that we don't want to get caught up in saying, you know, now's the time to go get those built and put more on our system to maintain without having any type of conversation about how we're going to maintain what we've got. Because remember, we're still running at a $400 million a year gap in what it would take to adequately keep all of our existing pavement at a good foundation level, a $50 million a year gap to keep all of our bridges.
Well, that's specifically what I wanted to ask you about. I mean, when I heard we were having this hearing about infrastructure, I thought of the timing of it, and I thought, well, we're going to thank President Biden and Senator Wicker and Congressman Thompson for sending this $3.3 billion over the next 5 years to deal with infrastructure. We've been talking about the need down here for so long, and now somebody's finally done something about it. But I want to understand about exactly what you just talked about. How much of this money and how will the legislature and the commission decide how much of this money is going to maintain our current system and how much of it should be for the projects that you've identified that are new projects? And how should we think about that? How much of that is going to be done by the legislature? How much of that is done by the commission? And how much of that do you think is going to be previously committed based on whatever federal rules that come down? And how are we going to figure that out?
Well, I think if you had asked the leadership of the legislature, they would tell you they're going to decide how to spend it. And if you ask the commission, they'd like the opportunity to spend
Okay.
it.
So,
But
the plan that you talked about,
everybody's going to have to work together on that.
right. And the plan that you talked about is based on a criteria that was set by,
Vision 21 package. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
That's the Vision 21 list of capacity projects that made it onto the list based on meeting the criteria that the legislature outlined in law.
Okay.
That was supposed, with its intent being, we will build capacity projects that meet certain criteria and are not driven by politics.
Right.
But I would remind you, because we were getting behind as a state in investing in the rehabilitation of our existing system, the
Right.
commission, by and large, there's a few exceptions, but by and large, had to make the decision to abandon building capacity projects
Right.
in order to divert our focus and funds toward the maintenance of the existing investment that we had, which is making a tremendous help, just like the lottery fund we're taking is making a tremendous help and going a long way, but it's not quite what would be considered sufficient.
And even all the money that is coming over the next 5 years is not enough to do both of those two things. And so, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like what we've got to figure out between the commission and the legislature, executive branch, is how much of this money is to the existing system that exists today, maintenance and bridges, and how much to the identified programs that meet the criteria that aren't even operational yet. Is that, and how to figure that out? Is that
think-
what
I
you
think
think, is the task before us?
I think the first step is to wait on Federal Highway and the feds to come out with their final list of rules and regulations on how the money can be spent, what categories will it go in. Then you would be able to determine what discretion there may be in how the money can go, what could be spent on capacity projects, what could be spent on rehabilitation, what could be spent in a number of other ways. And then from there, it's just, I think the art of legislating, sitting down and discussing the best path forward for the people of the state.
Do you think that's and I don't know how quickly things move in Washington, and the president hadn't signed the bill yet. I think he'll do that probably this week or next week. But do you think that's a 22 session decision for us, or is that a 23 decision?
I'd hate to say, it. I don't anticipate us having any kind of anywhere near a final from Federal Highway for another month.
Okay.
So it's possible. I mean, I expect to have something to be able to report back to the chairman, before the session starts. Now, whether
Okay.
that's a completed list, and again, it's going to be coming in 1 year increments over 5 years.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. White. It's been very helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank
We
you, ma'am.
appreciate you
Thank you.
coming. Mr. Howell with Delta Council is up next.
Chairwoman Branning, members of the committee, thank y'all for having us today. My name's Frank Howell. I'm a staff person for Delta Council. We're a regional agricultural and economic development organization in the northwest part of the state, representing 19 Delta and part Delta counties. By far, the economic engine of those 19 counties that we represent is agriculture. Over $3 billion a year of agricultural activity just at the farm gate. That does not include value added from there. Just in the sale of commodities in those areas, over 4 million acres of crops. More than 80% of the following crops are grown. The following crops grown in the state of Mississippi are grown in Northwest Mississippi: cotton, corn, rice, soybeans, wheat, and catfish. We estimate, Mississippi State estimates 51,000 people in the Mississippi Delta owe their livelihood to agriculture, and not just at the farm level, but throughout all chains of all areas of that economy. Sorry, I'm having eye problems. We liken the business of agriculture in the Delta to having small factories every mile. These small factories account for several million. They're farm shops, and then you go about a mile and there's another one. And they employ directly 10 to 15 people. Dozens and dozens more provide them input like seed, chemicals, fertilizer, equipment, trucking, and so many other allied agricultural activity. And of course, these little factories, as we call them, are generate millions of dollars of economic activity, again, selling those crops, oftentimes at very little or no margins. So these factories are located throughout all those counties, and I'll come back and address what y'all talked about earlier about the bridges in western Mississippi. But the allied agricultural businesses may be located in the county seat or in other more populated parts of those counties, but they're small communities around those farms and around those shops that depend solely on agriculture for their livelihood. When they harvest these commodities, the farms, the commodities don't know whether they leave the farm and go on a county road or a state aid road or a state highway or federal highway or a train, car, or a barge. They just know that we've got to get those commodities to market, not only for the sake of the farms, but for the entire region that depends on that economic output. Delta Council has appreciated the steps, and we talked about some of them earlier today, that the legislature's taken over the last 10 to 12 years to address what has obviously become a crisis, particularly in our part of the state, with roads and particularly bridges. I guess it's been almost a decade ago when the legislature had to step up and address a situation in Highway 32 and particularly Highway 6 between Batesville and Clarksdale. And that was the very definition of emergency situation, where traffic and commerce throughout an entire part of the region was stifled. More recently, as was mentioned earlier, the creation of the Emergency Ridge and Emergency Road and Bridge Rehab Fund in the special session in 2018. We support the continuation of that program and the expansion of it. It has been a blessing to areas of our region, and I'm sure our state, that otherwise would not be able to address these things in a timely manner. Unlike other more urban areas, there is often no other practical or alternate route for these commodities to go. I can cite numerous specific examples that we have today in the region where you have to go 30 to 50 miles out of the way. That increases the cost of everything, and certainly increases the bottom line for the producers trying to get their crops to market. So the thing that we'd like to emphasize moving forward, and I know Mr. McCormick's going to talk about the specifics, is as you look at the Emergency Road and Bridge Rehab Fund, look at what it does for towns, small communities like Holly Bluff or Duncan, or they're just throughout the entirety of Northwest Mississippi. It's not a matter of economic dislocation for them. It's a matter of economic survival. Agriculture is the only economy, except for government. There is no other. And so that is critical, that we take into account the matrix of how impactful those bridges and roads are to those rural areas. And I'm gonna follow up with something that Senator Hobson asked about earlier, and that's correct. Western Mississippi is ground zero for the bridge crisis, and as Harry Lee pointed out, most of that is due to the age. The Delta was really the first place in the state to have a modern bridge program. So our life cycle is, we're the first ones up, so to speak. Second of all, what I talked about being blessed with a incredible rural economy of production agriculture, that we can't abandon bridges like they've done in other parts of the state where there may not be as much activity in those rural areas. In all of those counties, there's economic activity everywhere. And then the final thing is, blessed with that good soil, we are blessed to live in an alluvial floodplain with lots of water bodies. And so I think back to the point of discussion earlier, I'd love to see the number of bridges in those counties in relation to how many are posted or closed. And it's been a long time since I've seen that, but we do, by virtue of our geography, have to have a lot more bridges. So again, we're firm supporters of the ERBRF fund, and it's been a lifeline to the Mississippi Delta and will continue to be as we continue to hopefully take off a lot of the red and yellow that you see on that map in front of you. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? All right, we appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Mr. McCormick.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me present to you today. I want to thank you personally for your commitment to the roads and the bridges and the infrastructure here in the state. Your tenacity and your positive can-do attitude, along with your committee, is easy to rally behind for our members to benefit the future of the state of Mississippi. I do want to talk to you a little bit about the Emergency Road and Bridge Fund and in the committee that was set up in 2018. I do think it was a fantastic success. You heard a lot of people here today mention it, and I think everyone here has positive reviews of what the committee, the money that we've allocated to the projects have done for the state of Mississippi. In the 2018 bill that authorized the Emergency Road and Bridge Fund, an advisory board was set up, and I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the members of that committee, which not only include Farm Bureau, but the Mississippi Economic Council, the Mississippi Poultry Association, Mississippi Cattlemen's Association, the American Council of Engineering Companies of Mississippi, the Mississippi Municipal League, Mississippi Loggers Association, Mississippi Manufacturers Association, Mississippi Supervisors Association, and the Truckers Associations all had great input into the criteria that we use to select projects for the funding that the legislature provided. The funding for 2018 ERBRF was in the form of bonds of $250 million. And then last year, we were grateful to receive another $89 million from CARES Act money to also do some more projects. I think you asked earlier on in a presentation of the projects that was selected in today's, I think, commission hearing. If I count them up right, I think there's 12 county projects that were selected and 4 MDOT projects. Unfortunately, there was none for the cities, and I know they would like to be included in the future, but that's the way I see that added up. There were some great questions early on about these projects, and I don't know that I can address them completely, but I can give you some explanation on a few of them. Senator Hobson asked some questions about how does someone like Issaquena County or my own county in Jefferson County were able to participate in such a project as we were charged with giving advice over. And one of the things that our committee talked about very stringently was not to use traffic counts. We can't use traffic counts in a place like Issaquena County or Jefferson County as the primary goal of expending the monies on these bridges, or they would never be able to compete in those projects. The second goal, and I don't have a map of the original project, but I think MDOT did a fantastic job of choosing the projects because we asked that as many projects as possible get funded with the money that we had, and they were funded for as many counties in the state as we could possibly fund those. So you could see in each district the effects of the ERBRF project. Like I said, I think that was spread very well over the entire state. The second round of ERBRF funds that we did last year were funded differently. It was funded through federal means. That comes with additional strings attached to it. It's a little bit harder to manage. And I think we all felt that probably bigger projects were needed to be used in this second round that we used last year because it was federal funds. But we hope in the future that the projects that we can possibly get back into a third round of the ERBRF would be state funded, so we could get back to the original criteria that we used. And Senator McClendon asked about DeSoto County and how someone there could possibly get into it. I think our committee was very focused that the name and the intent of the legislation was emergency road and bridge. So if there was a closed bridge or a posted bridge that created an emergency, that's what we were recommending to the Department of Transportation to fund. We recommended 4 goals for the program. The first goal was to fund projects that meet an existing safety concern to traveling public. The second goal, and I think it was a pivotal goal for us, was funding projects that restore commerce and economic vitality of the community, the region, state, and nation. The third goal was to fund projects that address existing issues of impending mobility and accessibility on public roadways. And finally, to fund projects that can be designed and constructed to meet the intent of House Bill 1. We heard very clearly from the governor and lieutenant governor at the time that they wanted to put this money in the fund and wanted to make sure that in year 3 that it was all going to projects, that it wasn't sitting in a bank account. So we've been really aware, and MDOT's done a great job of making sure that the projects were ready or shovel ready to before we awarded those projects. On the first round of applications, we had 690 applicants. A total of $970 million were requested. 167 projects were awarded by the commission. The projects replaced or repaired 205 bridges. 15% of those were MDOT bridges, and 85% of those were ERBR funds to locals. 12 million of that dollars was distributed to locals for pre-construction. A total of 209 million has been distributed. 66 projects under construction, 90 projects complete, and there could be more than that that just hadn't been reported. 7 projects are still in pre-construction. 4 projects were redrew and reapplied for the second round of the ERBR funds. 42 different contractors have worked on those projects. Overall, Madam Chair, it's been an overwhelming success to be able to get this money out to these projects. Think about from our standpoint, from farmers and people that live in rural areas of the state. Our part of the economy of the state is somewhere between 16 and 17 billion dollars. All of that travels down the roads of the state, whether it's a county road that connects to a state aid road, that connects to an MDOT road. Our people in the morning don't get up and say, wow, we got to do work on state aid or MDOT or county. We just look at it as one road system, and whatever we can do to fund that, to make sure that we have a reliable way of getting our crops to market, is what the Farm Bureau members think are most important. With all the work that we've done, Madam Chair, and you've done a great job of looking for more money, and I know you will continue to keep this and MDOT's and everyone's ask in mind. We certainly have not gotten close to the finish line. In Senator Hobson's region in Issaquah County, I was there just a month ago, and there was a bridge out that crossed a bayou there, and a farmer was having to go 10 miles around on every trip to where he could have just crossed one little bridge to get to his elevators. Those funds were already closed by the time that bridge was inspected to find out that it was bad, and we weren't able to get that project in. So there's a definite need in the future for us to continue to look at this, and I hope we can continue to look at dedicated sources of money for ERBRF in the future. That's what I have. I think it's been a overwhelming success story for the state. I appreciate all the leadership on both sides of this chamber, the governor and the lieutenant governor and everybody that sat down to come up with this important program. It's been a really good thing.
Senator McClendon.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr. McCormick. One of the commodities that we have in DeSoto County is children. Our DeSoto County School District has approximately 35,000. Along with that, we have 400 buses, give or take, and they run 1,000 routes. So should that not be counted in the system?
It was definitely looked at, and one of the priorities that we looked at was how far school buses and ambulances were going out of the way to pick up their the school children, or if somebody was in an emergency situation.
But they
we did
weren't,
terminate it.
they weren't included in the traffic count.
We didn't say you couldn't use traffic count. We were just trying to make sure that rural county roads and bridges that move commerce would have a potential to be a selected project. I do think that safety was the #1 criteria that MDOT used and Jeff May can help me with that, but I do believe safety was the #1 issue that they put at the top of their list when they were selecting projects, which would be school buses and ambulances.
So that would be included in traffic count.
I think that what they used it was is how far out of the way that they were going to pick up the children, or how far out of the way an ambulance would have to go to pick up a patient if a bridge was closed, by selecting that project.
Thank you, sir.
I just want to say to Mr. McCormick and MDOT and everybody that is involved in the Emergency Road and Bridge Fund, I have been so pleased at how the fund has been run, and the way everyone works together. I think project selection is right on. We all have needs in our district. I think that one of the keys in addressing this map that we see, especially on the western side of the state, that really stands out to me, is if we can work together and make sure that this fund continues. I think that's very important to continue to address the critical infrastructure needs in our state. So I thank you everyone for coming. Let me make sure there are no other questions before we conclude. All right. Thank you so much.